I am going to warn everybody right at the front. This video is not for the faint of heart. To be honest, I've been grinding on this for like an hour. Super frustrating. But that's the way it goes sometimes with these complex balance sheets. We have to remember that A, you want to remember why are you calculating ROIC. B, you have to remember, okay, not only what is the formula, but what adjustments am I going to make? What judgment calls am I going to make to try to get that calculation I'm looking for, which is a more true version of ROIC. And in my case, I mean, for everybody, it might be a little bit different. In my case, I want to know what's the profitability, capital efficiency of the core operations of the business. I think a lot of people can kind of agree with that. So that's the lens that goes into each judgment call. And so to go back a little bit, you'll notice I ignored derivatives. And this is something I went back and forth on for a long time. But you can see we have derivatives in short-term, long-term, short-term liabilities, long-term liabilities. If you search through their 10K here, they say how they use that. I'll just show you. Basically, the reason why they use it is because they are delivering energy capacity transmission, and they say that there are financial risks inherent with the purchase and sale of fuel and electricity. You kind of do see that with a lot of businesses anyway. They might hedge for, Forex differences or interest rate. You kind of see that too, maybe with a financial company. In this case, if you net out all of the, and I know this won't be a satisfactory answer for perfectionists, even like myself. I mean, I hate having to say this, but if you net it out, it comes out to a very small amount anyway. And so we're talking about like 2 basis points of difference in your ROIC. So, calculating ROIC is hard enough as it is. Don't make it harder than it needs to be. All right, here we have a special use funds. Never heard of that, so we're going to Control F. Control F is your friend in a complex balance sheet. So what are they saying? What are these things? I know the answer, but I want you to see it yourself. Okay, so you have these special use funds. They cover cost of storm damage. And that's kind of so you would argue that that should be part of the business, because they are it's also like a reserve for their decommissioning of nuclear units. So, okay, so I'm corrected then, because in this case, they talk about special use funds as primarily debt and equity securities, and kind of like a type of mutual fund, but not actively traded. And so they're talking about the different ways they state the valuation there. Usually when I see that, I would think, okay, this is just kind of redundant cash, like another form of cash or securities that they're just keeping for a rainy day fund. But as we saw in the other notes, it is something that they have special use cases for. So in that case, we are going to add them as part of the core operating part of the business. And, myself not being a expert on this business, I haven't run through the annual report. So that's new information to me. And so obviously the more you can learn about the business, the better you'll get at this stuff for the particular businesses you're looking at. So this is related to pension benefit. So I couldn't remember, so I had to Google, should pension assets be included in invested capital? One of my favorite teachers, New Constructs, said they are similar to excess cash, should not be included. Google AI also says because they are similar to excess cash, they're not being used to create revenue. So I kind of read that like, okay, not part of the core operations of the business. And so we are going to not include it in our operating assets. So that covers that part. Regulatory assets, kind of self-explanatory, should be in there. Remember, we're excluding derivatives, and then we've got goodwill and other long-term assets. Woo, okay. So we have our number. Here's invested capital. Now, because it's a complex balance sheet, you want to check your work. You want to look at the financing approach to this. So remember that. We're going to do that next, and that's why this is kind of hairy. But let's get ourselves an ROIC while we're at it. There's our effective tax rate. And so we get ROIC of 5.7. Pretty low, but this company is also growing like a weed. I imagine their WACC's probably lower too, because they're probably able to issue a lot of short-term low interest rate debt. That's a conversation for another day. So now let's look at the financing approach. We are checking our work, seeing if there are any things that we've missed as we've calculated from the operating standpoint. So just looking at assets. This approach kind of takes the opposite approach. You start at equity instead of starting at assets, and then you exclude the things, aka subtract from equity, all of the things that are not part of the core operations of the business. These are more parent company items than actual core operations of the business. There's two areas of taxes here for liabilities, so we're going to make sure we sum those. No deferred revenue, other long-term liabilities, 2762. Now let's go to the cash, 2690. Investment securities. Remember, I would probably use that in this case, but because they are earmarking that for particular use, it's going to be part of the core business. We're not going to include that in investment securities. And then tax-related assets. Remember, I mean, you got to kind of use your memory here, your brain power, that there are pension assets that we excluded in the operating side. So we're going to make sure they are excluded on the financing side. And that's that. There are non-controlling interests. I'm going to save you, again, 15, 20 minutes of my time that was spent thrashing. We have non-controlling interests that are redeemable, VIEs. They are also consolidated in our financials. So we want to make sure when we're looking at shareholders' equity, we are taking that into account. And then you also have the other kind of more standard non-controlling interests, which they've also broken out for us. So, well, let's double check our work. And it is off. Okay, so we have 154 billion, 151 billion. Now, at this venture, this part of the process, I recommend going back and checking every line item. And I know that's tedious, but that's something that would be the first step, because it's like, okay, did we type something wrong? That's always possible. And hopefully, if you're lucky, that's the answer, because then you don't have to make any hard judgment calls. In this case, I'm not seeing any mistypes for me, but we will double check anyway, because I've seen my errors plenty of times, and there's no substitute for checking your work. Another tip, kind of while we're in here, if you're really thrashing on a problem on a complex balance sheet and you just cannot get the answer, take a hint from my engineering days. You sleep on it, and then you take it on a fresh morning, fresh pair of eyes, fresh brain. You might find your mistake. In this case, I have thrashed for probably over an hour on this. And so I know, I have the spoiler alert. I know what's causing us to be off. Okay, so no mistypes. The next step then would be to go through each of these line items and double check, okay, did I make the right judgment call? Should this be included or should it be excluded? Now, in this case, because I know, I kind of glossed this over. This is important though. Generally, when I see asset retirement, I think of assets and retirement. So I'm thinking of pension assets or liabilities, and so I'm generally excluding those in operating assets. Remember, if you're excluding an operating, it should be also excluded as a line item in the financing. But anyway, in the process of control Fing, reading through the notes and looking at trying to get more information so you can make a good judgment call, I found this little nugget. And so what this is it's part of, I believe this is either consolidated as part of your other long-term assets or part of regulatory assets, probably the regulatory one, and then they're netting out liabilities. But you can see there's a little deferred taxes line item. And remember, we do not want tax-related assets in our operating assets. So we're going to sub that out. And we can see that gets us a lot closer. We are, again, frustrating because you're not 100% there, but that difference between 151.6 and 159 is an ROIC of 5.85 versus an ROIC of 5.82. So don't get all stressed out like I like to do about 3 basis points. At least we had to make a judgment call. Is it closer to 151 or is it closer to 154? You use Control F, you find line items. You can see in this case, rather than making it nice and having a deferred taxes on, let's say, the asset side of the balance sheet or as part of their deferred tax liabilities, they've hidden it in this little. I actually see they have 2 line items. They have one for NEE and one for FPL. So I think FPL, you guys can double check my work. I'm gonna call it here. But I'm pretty sure FPL is consolidated inside of NEE. And so we're wanting, as we're doing invested capital for NEE, we're looking at this, and they're just basically saying this much of that was FPL and the rest is NEE. So I'm gonna call it there. That's the big takeaways. Again, very frustrating to not get it all match up, but I've done a lot of these, and especially the complex ones. They don't always match up perfectly, but what's important is the process you took, that you, if you didn't get an easy answer, that you go through, you read through the notes, you go through line item by line item, double check your work, make those tough judgment calls, and then move on with your life. Regardless, we got kind of a range of 5-6% ROIC, and that's close enough to be probably very accurate. All right, I'll talk to you later.